Most people never discover that their thoughts are not their own. They move through life with absolute confidence in opinions they never created, desires they never chose, fears they never questioned, and ambitions they never examined. They call this freedom. It is not freedom. It is conditioning so complete that it becomes invisible. The most effective prison is not the one built from concrete and steel. It is the one built inside the mind. A prison where the prisoner believes he is free. A prison where the walls cannot be touched because they exist inside perception itself. Thousands of years ago, Plato described a reality that most people still fail to understand. The disturbing part is not that he described it. The disturbing part is that he described you. Imagine a group of people who have spent their entire lives chained inside a cave. Not for years, not for decades. For their entire existence, their heads are fixed in place. They cannot turn around. They cannot look behind them. They cannot investigate the source of what they see. All they can do is stare at a wall. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, figures pass carrying objects that cast shadows onto the wall. The prisoners see the shadows, nothing else. They hear echoes, nothing else. To them, the shadows become reality, not because the shadows are convincing, because the prisoners have never seen anything else. This is where most interpretations stop. This is also where most people miss the point. The cave was never about ancient prisoners. The cave is about the human condition itself. Plato understood something uncomfortable about the mind. People do not see reality. They see interpretations, and after enough repetition, interpretations become reality. A child is born into a world he did not create. Before he can think, he is taught what to think. Before he can question, he is given answers. Before he can observe reality, reality is explained to him by people who inherited explanations from others. By the time he becomes an adult, he carries thousands of assumptions that feel like personal discoveries. Yet most were implanted long before he possessed the ability to resist them. The process is subtle. No force is required. No chains are visible. The mind adapts. Human beings have always preferred familiar illusions over uncomfortable truths, not because they are weak, because certainty feels safe. The unknown does not. A lie repeated long enough becomes emotionally familiar, and emotional familiarity is often mistaken for truth. Observe people closely. Not what they say, what they defend. You will discover that many individuals do not protect facts. They protect identities. An idea becomes attached to their sense of self. Question the idea and they feel personally attacked. Expose a contradiction and they become defensive. Present evidence and they become hostile. Not because they are irrational. Because the mind treats threats to identity as threats to survival. This creates one of the most powerful mechanisms of control ever discovered. If you can shape what people identify with, you can influence what they perceive. If you can influence perception, you can influence behavior. If you can influence behavior, control becomes almost effortless. Most systems of influence understand this perfectly. Power rarely depends upon force. Force is expensive. Force creates resistance. The most efficient form of power is voluntary obedience. When people believe they are choosing what they were programmed to choose, domination becomes invisible. This is the genius of the cave. The prisoners do not need guards. The prisoners guard themselves. The moment a false reality becomes psychologically comfortable, individuals begin protecting it more aggressively than any ruler ever could, because the illusion no longer belongs to the system, it belongs to them. This pattern appears everywhere. People inherit beliefs, defend beliefs, pass beliefs forward, yet few ever stop to ask where those beliefs originated. Even fewer ask who benefits from them. That question is dangerous. Not because it reveals conspiracies, because it reveals dependence. The average person believes his thoughts emerge from independent reasoning. In reality, much of human behavior emerges from imitation. People imitate language. They imitate values. They imitate ambitions. They imitate fears. Then they mistake imitation for individuality. The cave survives because imitation feels natural. Original thought feels dangerous. A person who questions, accepted, assumptions threatens the psychological comfort of everyone around him. This is why genuine independence often produces social friction. The individual who sees differently becomes a problem, not necessarily because he is wrong, but because he introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is intolerable to minds that depend upon stability. This explains a phenomenon that has repeated itself throughout history. The person who challenges prevailing narratives is often rejected long before he is understood. The reaction is predictable. People do not evaluate truth first. They evaluate consequences if accepting a truth threatens status, relationships, certainty, identity, or belonging. Resistance appears immediately. The mind calculates risk before it calculates accuracy. This is not an accident. It is survival. For most of human history, exclusion from the group carried severe consequences. Belonging increased survival. Isolation reduced it. As a result, the human mind evolved to prioritize social acceptance. This tendency remains active even when survival is no longer at stake. People fear social rejection with astonishing intensity. Many would rather repeat comfortable falsehoods than risk standing alone with uncomfortable truths. The cave depends upon this instinct. The shadows survive because they are collectively reinforced. Everyone confirms everyone else's reality. The illusion becomes self-sustaining. Then something unusual happens. One prisoner is freed. At first, freedom feels like suffering. This is the part most people underestimate. Truth rarely feels good in the beginning. Reality does not arrive as enlightenment. It arrives as disruption, confusion, disorientation, pain. Imagine spending your entire life staring at shadows and suddenly being forced to look toward the fire. The light burns your eyes. The images blur. Everything familiar collapses. You no longer know what is real. The prisoner does not celebrate. The prisoner resists. Plato understood that ignorance is not merely absence of knowledge. Ignorance becomes a form of comfort, and comfort is addictive. People assume that if truth appeared before them, they would embrace it immediately. History suggests otherwise. Human beings often resist information that contradicts deeply established assumptions, not because they are incapable of understanding, because understanding requires reconstruction. The old self must die before a new understanding can emerge. Most people underestimate how painful that process can be. Every illusion serves a purpose, even destructive ones, even false ones. They provide structure, meaning, predictability. Remove them suddenly and the mind experiences instability. This is why many people retreat into familiar narratives, even after evidence disproves them. The narrative matters less than the certainty it provides. The cave is not maintained by ignorance alone. It is maintained by psychological dependence. And dependence creates vulnerability. The individual who depends upon external validation becomes controllable. The individual who depends upon social approval becomes predictable. The individual who depends upon collective agreement loses the ability to think independently. Such people can be directed without realizing they are being directed, not because they are unintelligent, because dependence creates leverage. Power has always understood leverage. The most sophisticated forms of control do not attack freedom directly. They redefine freedom. They encourage individuals to mistake obedience for choice, consumption for fulfillment, attention for value, visibility for significance. The result is a society filled with movement but lacking direction. People chase objectives they never selected, compete for rewards they never examined, fear judgments from individuals they do not respect, and throughout the process, they remain convinced they are acting independently. The cave evolves, the shadows change shape. The mechanism remains identical. Plato understood something that remains profoundly relevant. The greatest deception is not being lied to. The greatest deception is participating in the lie without recognizing it. Because once a lie becomes part of your identity, you stop questioning it. You start defending it. You become its protector, and that is where the prison reaches its highest form. The prisoner becomes the warden. The victim becomes the enforcer. The illusion becomes self-perpetuating. Most people never notice the transition. They spend their lives arguing over shadows while remaining, blind to the fire that creates them. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all is this: the cave is not somewhere else. It is not occupied by other people. It is not limited to governments, institutions, cultures, or ideologies. The cave exists wherever perception replaces reality. It exists wherever comfort replaces inquiry. It exists wherever certainty becomes more valuable than truth. Which means the most dangerous prison is not around you. It is within you. And most people will spend their entire lives defending its walls without ever realizing they are trapped. The escape does not end when the chains are removed. In many ways, that is where the real struggle begins. Most people imagine freedom as a destination, a moment of revelation, a sudden awakening in which confusion disappears and clarity takes its place. Reality is far less elegant. The prisoner who leaves the cave enters a world that feels hostile. Everything he once trusted becomes questionable. Every certainty begins to dissolve. The foundations of his reality crack beneath him. For a time, he possesses neither the comfort of illusion nor the confidence of understanding. He exists between worlds, and that space is dangerous. Human beings can tolerate suffering surprisingly well. What they struggle to tolerate is uncertainty. Suffering at least provides familiarity. Uncertainty provides nothing. This is why many individuals return to old illusions even after glimpsing reality, not because they have been defeated, because the burden of seeing becomes heavier than the comfort of blindness. Plato understood that truth demands a price that most people are unwilling to pay, because truth does not merely change what you know. It changes who you are. Every realization destroys a previous version of yourself. Every deeper understanding requires abandoning an older certainty. The process resembles death more than discovery. A quiet death, an invisible death, the death of assumptions, the death of inherited beliefs, the death of identities built upon fragile foundations, and every death leaves a wound. This explains why genuine transformation rarely appears dramatic from the outside. The most profound battles occur internally. A person may appear calm while entire structures of thought collapse within him. Old narratives lose their grip. Old ambitions lose their meaning. Old fears lose their authority. And yet this transition creates another problem. The more clearly a person sees reality, the more difficult it becomes to participate in collective illusions. He notices things others ignore. He hears contradictions hidden inside certainty. He sees incentives hidden beneath morality. He recognizes performances disguised as authenticity. Patterns emerge everywhere. The same motives repeating beneath different masks. The same hunger for status dressed in different language. The same pursuit of power disguised as virtue. The same self-interest concealed beneath noble explanations. This is where Plato's lesson becomes darker, because the prisoner eventually discovers that the cave was never sustained by ignorance alone. It was sustained by desire. People often claim they want truth. What they usually want is reassurance. Truth is only welcome when it confirms existing beliefs. When it threatens them, the relationship changes immediately. Observe human behavior carefully. People rarely ask questions to discover answers. More often, they ask questions seeking confirmation. They search not for reality, but for reinforcement. The mind prefers validation over investigation, because validation preserves identity. Investigation threatens it. This creates an invisible cycle. People construct narratives, then they search for evidence supporting those narratives. Anything contradictory becomes uncomfortable. Anything supportive becomes convincing. The result is predictable. The individual gradually becomes trapped inside a reality of his own construction, a personalized cave, a prison tailored specifically to his preferences, and because the prison reflects his desires, he mistakes it for freedom. This mechanism explains countless human conflicts. Two individuals observe the same event, yet they arrive at entirely different conclusions, not because reality changed, because perception filtered reality before understanding occurred. Each person sees not the world itself, but a version shaped by expectation, emotion, and self-interest. The mind edits reality constantly, removing details, adding interpretations, creating meaning where none exists, filling gaps with assumptions. Most people never notice this process. They assume they are observing objectively. In reality, they are observing selectively. The cave exists not only around perception, it exists inside perception. This realization introduces an uncomfortable possibility. What if the greatest deceptions are not imposed by others? What if they are created by the mind itself? The human mind possesses an extraordinary ability to protect itself from discomfort. It rationalizes failures, justifies weaknesses, reinterprets mistakes, reconstructs memories, alters narratives, not necessarily through conscious dishonesty, but through unconscious preservation. The ego survives by controlling interpretation. If reality threatens self-image, reality is often modified internally before it is accepted externally. This is why self-knowledge is so rare. To know oneself requires confronting things the mind desperately wishes to conceal. Weaknesses, contradictions, hidden motives, petty desires, private fears, unacknowledged ambitions. The average person can identify flaws in strangers with remarkable precision, yet remains blind to identical flaws within himself. The cave extends inward, the shadows are psychological, and the fire that creates them often burns inside the observer. This is why Plato's message remains timeless. He was not describing a political problem. He was describing a human problem, a problem rooted in perception itself, because every individual enters life vulnerable to illusion, not merely external illusion, internal illusion. The stories people tell themselves become more influential than the facts they observe. Someone convinces himself that wealth will create fulfillment. Years later, fulfillment remains absent. Another convinces himself that status will eliminate insecurity. Status arrives, insecurity remains. Another believes approval will create peace. Approval comes, peace never follows. The objective changes. The hunger remains. The pursuit continues. This cycle repeats endlessly because the problem was never external. The illusion existed at the level of perception. The cave promised satisfaction through shadows. The shadows delivered only temporary distraction. What makes this dangerous is that society rewards many of these illusions. Entire systems are built around them. People are encouraged to pursue symbols rather than substance, appearances rather than reality, recognition rather than understanding. The result is a culture obsessed with visibility. Everyone wishes to be seen, few wish to see, and there is a profound difference between the two. To be seen requires performance. To see requires awareness. Performance attracts attention. Awareness attracts understanding. One increases status. The other increases freedom. Most choose status, not because they are foolish, because status offers immediate rewards. Freedom demands sacrifice. The prisoner leaving the cave gains understanding, but he loses certainty, he loses belonging. He loses the comfort of collective agreement. For a time, he becomes an outsider, and humans fear isolation more than ignorance. This fear has controlled countless lives. People silence observations to avoid conflict. suppress questions to avoid rejection, accept falsehoods to preserve relationships. They recognize contradictions, yet remain silent, not because they are incapable of speaking, because social survival feels more important than intellectual honesty. The cave survives through silence as much as deception. The majority need not believe the illusion completely. They only need to avoid challenging it. A truth left unspoken eventually becomes powerless, and powerlessness allows falsehood to expand. History demonstrates this repeatedly. The greatest manipulations often succeed not because they are convincing,